we will start with our next speaker, who is Andy Watson from Hutch, who's going to talk to us about 5 things about autonomous teams. Andy, are you there?
Yep. Hi, Rick. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Great to see you.
Brilliant. Great to see you as well. Good
Awesome.
filling in.
Thank you. Yeah, hopefully everybody has a full understanding of what to expect, and your slides are coming up, so that's all looking great. Yeah, if anybody has any questions for Andy, do drop them into the Q&A section, or you can drop them into the chat. We're picking up from those as well. I am going to mute and have a big glass of water, and I'm going to let you, Andy, take it away.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Rick. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me. This is 5 things about autonomous teams. To get started, I'm just going to introduce myself and talk a little bit about what we do and our culture at Hutch to give this talk a little bit more context. Let's see. So I'm Andy Watson. That's me with the coloured eyebrows. During lockdown, my kids were colouring their hair, but I'm bald, so they did my eyebrows instead. And that's the most professional picture I have. I'm Hutch COO. I'm responsible for all development and studio operations. I've previously worked at Playfish, EA Mobile and Glue Mobile as part of 20 years in the games industry. And the last 7 years have been spent at Hutch. My purpose is really just to help businesses really just try and make great games teams. What does Hutch do? So we're really trying to redefine racing games for mobile. We're using a development process that's focused around our community and getting the games out as games out live as early as possible and empowering our teams to move quickly. We've got 105 staff and we're recruiting 30 more. And we've raised $5.5 million in investment to date. And most importantly, we're profitable. What drives us? And there's a picture of a car and we make racing games. So lots of fun there. Think of the synergy. We often get asked why mobile racing. It's not the highest performing genre. But when you look at Fast and Furious being a top 10 grossing movie franchise of all time, F1 having over 500 million viewers of every race, YouTube automotive content has billions of views. There are huge racing franchises on console. We exist really to make racing games work on mobile, but we also want to be really the best place to work. We're not there yet, but I'm hoping one day Hutch will be the benchmark. When people think about what's somewhere amazing to work, I really want Hutch to be at the top of that list. To give a little bit more insight into Hutch and our culture, we redid our website recently. The previous one looked a little bit like a school project and we left it up for far too long. And as part of that, we did a video, which hopefully give a little bit of a flavor for Hutch. I'm hoping we can play the video now. Share my screen again. But before we get into the 5 things about autonomous teams, I just want to talk a little bit about why I thought this was an interesting topic and the impact it's had on Hutch as a business. So when I joined Hutch in 2013, we were a really small studio and we're in the middle of this transition from premium to free to play. Hutch's 5 founders were all ex-Sony and they'd left to create Hutch out of a real sense of frustration. They just didn't feel like they were able to get things done. And a lot of the early joiners at Hutch had joined from larger corporate gaming backgrounds, myself included. And there was a desire to build a different way of working, And we believed in, and we still do, that by building expertise and experience within our game teams, we'll be able to build a great culture where teams can experiment, fail maybe, but learn and develop, not just with design, but with process and structure as well. And ultimately, we'd build better games as a result. So the reason I wanted to show this slide is it's a great indication of how Hutch as a business has grown from working in this way. Now, we've had tough times as a company. We've had highs and lows like anyone else, and we've definitely made a lot of mistakes. But more recently, the learnings have been really coming together, and we've been starting to see it pay off. The reason I wanted to talk about this is people ask, who did you hire that made that difference? Or what change was it that you made? But it was a result of autonomous teams incrementally learning, trusting the team to try new things and improve. And now we've got an annual run rate of $80 million per year. We're profitable with margins of 20 to 30%. We've had over 300 million people play our games and 1 million new players each week. For those of you who don't know our games, we've launched 11 games in total, starting back in 2012 with Smash Cops. These are our current games. So Top Drive's strategic card collection game with over 2,000 licensed cards, the most of any game in the world. The team were really inspired by Top Trumps and what it would look like on mobile. F1 Manager is a real-time multiplayer racing strategy game that lets players create their own F1 team and compete against other managers from around the world. And Rebel Racing is a bright, optimistic, action-packed racing game where players can race legendary cars across the west coast of America. F1, Rebel Racing, and Top Drives are all live, and then Puzzle Heist is in soft launch. It's a puzzle RPG game with immersive 3D graphics, licensed cars, and Fast and Furious style gameplay. And we also have a few other kind of games that we're kind of prototyping internally. These are the games that we're currently supporting post-launch, and I think it's a good representation of how Hutch teams work. It wouldn't have been possible for a company our size to launch and grow these titles without building this kind of culture of autonomy. So those 5 things, the reason we're here today, these are the 5 aspects of building autonomous teams that we at Hutch believe are key to building teams that are empowered to make great products and a culture that teams are excited to work in. So 1, servant leadership. 2, freedom and responsibility. 3, build trust. 4, agile development. And 5, community at the core. So servant leadership. What is servant leadership? Servant leadership is a long-term approach centered around mentoring individuals and teams to grow and develop. Servant leaders believe the best working environments draw on the strengths of the team. By working with them to do what they do best, they're best served by a humble leadership that is prepared to learn as well as teach. Now, when you think about free-to-play games development, it's really hard. There are so many considerations you need to make in order to acquire, engage, retain, and monetize players. And you need to ensure the right people are making the right decisions. So we asked ourselves, who's making the game? Who knows the challenges? Who knows the players? Who's living and breathing the space? And who's observing the competitor landscape? Who should be making the big decisions? And the answer to all those questions was the team. So to ensure the right people are on the team to make the decisions, we've got all the usual artists, engineers, QA, designers, producers, but also we put on the team analysts, customer support, community managers, and product managers. And it's a servant leader's job to make sure the team have all the expertise and tools they need to be successful. And that also means giving them all the information they need to be a success and also being transparent about performance. So that doesn't mean that we haven't been challenged by this process. And one of those challenges happened during Top Drive's launch. So it had really poor early retention at launch. And everybody knows that retention is just so important. And the natural reaction is to delay the launch and fix the retention issue. But the games team recognized this hugely engaged audience, and the team focused on serving that dedicated audience rather than delaying, allowing them to get the game out sooner, see what works and see what doesn't, and build the game around those players. And now it's our biggest ever title. Freedom and responsibility. So games development is difficult. Free-to-play games development is hugely competitive. New games coming out all the time. The barrier to entry is getting higher. Production values are increasing and costs are going up. If we give our games teams the freedom to try new things, manage their workload and innovate and be ambitious, they also have to accept the responsibility that goes with that. It's about working with the team to create a goal and let the team decide how to achieve it. Make sure the team has control over the following. So they need to be able to decide what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, who they're going to do it with, and when they're going to do it. And with that freedom comes the responsibility. So we've had to make sure we ensure the team understands what they're responsible for and accountable for within the game, how they're going to demonstrate that accountability, and how we're going to define if a game's successful, who's in charge of whether a game is successful, or if the team is better off working on something else. And for us, it's the team really making all those calls. So we have a pillar at Hutch called Stand on the Shoulders of Giants. And we created this pillar after Race Kings. So it was our most expensive and longest development to date, and we'd innovated across the board. So gameplay changes, metagame, matchmaking, UX. Ultimately, it didn't work. We just hadn't appreciated how free-to-play structures are so fragile. And there isn't a studio in the world that's able to consistently just smash out hit after hit after hit. So if the team wants to innovate, they need to have a clear understanding of why and how is this an improvement. And there's times we've gotten this wrong. Not all staff want to work in this way. It's a different kind of pressure. Some just want to get their heads down and just plow through a list of tasks. And we give a lot of freedom, but that comes with a lot of responsibility, and not everybody's ready for that. So we've had to change our hiring process and our onboarding process around this, and it's been much harder during lockdown. And we need to ensure that we know the qualities and attributes that thrive in this environment. And let candidates get a window into how we work and decide if it's for them. Build trust is number 3. This might seem really obvious, but it takes more effort than you might think. It's a key part of having a good relationship with your teams, and it puts them in a position to do greater things. You've really got to listen to your team members. There's no better way to build trust than listening and showing that you actually care. Getting to know them personally and professionally, take accountability and acknowledge when you get something wrong, embrace failure and treat it as an opportunity to learn, but be honest, consistent and transparent. So transparency is a big one for Hutch. We make all company data available to the team, full analytics access. We train everybody in how to use it. Everyone has full access to sales data, UA performance, Hutch financial performance as well. And I'm always baffled when I hear about teams that don't know information about their revenue or their UA performance or how their LTV is calculated for their products. And another part of that is we also hold weekly briefings with the entire studio where anyone can ask any questions on any topic, and they can do it anonymously if they prefer as well. We want everybody in the studio to understand why we work the way they do and question or challenge it if they have a better way of working. Because remember, like, trust goes both ways. They need to trust you as much as you trust them. They need to know that if they make a mistake, they'll be trusted to learn and improve. So you need to set clear expectations of each other, of the team and yourself as a leadership. Be transparent about what's working and what isn't working, and encourage the team to question and challenge what they don't like. So instead of asking, is everything okay, or is there anything I can do to help, ask about, what don't you like about working here? What opportunities are we missing out on? If you could change one thing, what would it be? And resist the temptation to kind of sit on the shoulder and second guess or build unnecessary processes. Ultimately, it's all about building kind of psychological safety, that belief that the team can feel safe to take risks, ask questions, or propose new ideas, or admit a mistake without any fear of being seen as ignorant, incompetent, negative, or disruptive. So we've had big challenges with this approach. We've always getting challenged. And F1 Manager launched just last year, and the game had scaling issues at launch. The launch felt quite rushed. It didn't really feel ready, and we're asking the team if they needed more time. But they were worried about saying, we do need more time, it's not ready. They'd seen the great soft launch performance. They felt a lot of pressure, and they just didn't feel comfortable delaying. They were so keen to get the game out early in the season, excited to see it perform. They didn't want to let anybody down. ultimately, we did launch it on time, but it had significant issues at launch. So since then, we've been really working on, and still are working on, improving psychological safety at Hutch, so that anyone can feel comfortable putting their hand up and just saying, it's just not ready. Ultimately, though, the team solved the issues. They got the game back on its feet with no real help from the leadership team, and it's doing amazing things. Agile development. So anybody who knows me knows I bloody love Agile. Most people look at Agile or Scrum as just a process, but it was built as a philosophy, not just a process. The Agile Manifesto was built on 12 principles. I won't quote them all, but there are two that really resonate with me and what I'm trying to say here. So I'm taking these off the Agile Alliance website, but build projects and around motivated individuals, give them the environment and support they need, and trust them to get the job done. So I often hear about studios and companies that claim to work using Agile, but don't appreciate the philosophy involved and just do stand-ups and planning and demos and retrospectives. They still dictate and control too much of what's going on. Another principle is the best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. Too many studios focus on stand-ups and planning meetings and just forget the rest. Agile development was built for autonomous teams. It's just so great at this, and it really helps ensure you get the best product. Big challenges to this approach were another launch, Rebel Racing launch. We didn't have feature parity with some of our competitors. We're thinking, where are the tilt controls? Where are the bonnet cameras? Where's the clan system? And there was a temptation as a company to delay the launch to add these features. But the team were focused on getting it out live and building on it with a live audience. With any game, there's a risk that it might not work. Now Rebel Racing's been live for 7 months, and some of those features are in and some aren't, but the team are owning the backlog and making those decisions. It's growing its audience, and it's got a really exciting roadmap of features aimed at really satisfying that audience. And the last point is community at the core. If you're going to trust the team and give them the freedom to make decisions, you need to be confident that they're making the decisions for the right people. Now, everybody has a game that they want to make, and it's easy for everyone to think that they're representative of the player, but ultimately, nobody sets out to make a bad game, yet so many people do, or at least a game that doesn't function as a business. And we've definitely done that as well. But you need to ensure the team know who they're building the game for. And how do you know if your game are making the right game for the right people? Well, at Hutch, we just give it to the players. You build the game around the community. You build the game around the players. So quantitative testing, get the game live and in front of loads of people. Test your ideas, test your gameplay, your meta structure, your marketing assets, and get real data. And then qualitative testing. So dig in deep into how they're playing and what ideas are landing and what aren't. Now, I guarantee, however you think people are going to play, you'll be surprised. Nobody sets out to make a bad game or a financial failure. You've got to be humble and test it. Nobody has all the answers. And if a team's working with the players, it gives them the information they need to build something great. It lets them see what's working, what isn't, and what can be improved, and ultimately focus on what's making the most difference. So those 5 things. Autonomous teams are empowered. Autonomous teams and empowered teams and independent teams are terms that are thrown around a lot, but you really have to live it and make it part of your core culture. And for us at Hutch, it's definitely not a done deal. We're improving at this all the time, and we're being challenged by this all the time, but you really need to live those values if you want to make it work. I truly believe this has helped us drive our success. Without this approach, I'm not sure Hutch would still be around, let alone growing. So those 5 things are like servant leadership. Think about what sort of leader you want to be, if you want a long or short-term approach, but ultimately remember who's making the game and think of how to support them. Freedom and responsibility. Work with the team to define how they want to work, give them the freedom to work how they want, but ensure they understand the responsibility involved. Build trust. Ensure the team feel heard, understood, and supported. If there's a shared trust between you and the team, it will allow you to improve, avoid mistakes, and ultimately keep your team happy. And happy, motivated teams make better games. Agile development, this is what it's built for. don't get bogged down in how do I make the process work. Remember the philosophy behind it and why it was created in the first place. It was created because software development works better when multidisciplinary teams work together to define how they're going to work rather than being told how they're going to work. And community at the core. Everybody has a game they want to make, and nobody sets out to make it a failure, yet so many of us do, so many times we do. Ultimately, it's the players decide if you're going to be a success or not, and teams should be working with their players as early as possible. But that's it from me. That was 5 things about autonomous teams. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen. Hopefully it'll be of use to some of you. I believe we've got some time left for questions, if there are any.
Yes, we've got quite a few questions. First of all, thank you so much for that talk. It was really interesting. I love knowing about how teams are put together and that kind of thing. I've got a couple of things that I'm kind of curious about. So obviously, like, building autonomous teams and allowing people all this freedom, I'm sure it has a lot of difficulty involved. Would you say it's, like, obviously it's worked for Hutch. Would you say it's the right strategy for every studio, or is it just something that has worked for you and think there are lessons to be learned from it?
I struggle to think of an environment where it wouldn't necessarily work. I think if you've got a short-term goal or short-term ambition that you need to recognize very quickly, and you're the driving force before that, or if you're a very small company and you haven't got all the tools and experience in place, then you might need to take assert more influence. But everywhere I've worked, whether it was being big game studios like EA or smaller places like Hutch, I felt like the team are ultimately the ones who are kind of day-to-day living with the game. And we had this, I think Sean used this term of his time at Sony, as they were green light overlords who'd just basically, they'd play your game once and be like, no, we're not doing it. And it's just like, they've spent a matter of hours with your game where you might have spent years with it, and they're making those decisions. So I just feel like autonomous teams are putting the right people in the right place to make those decisions. And it's just I struggle to see when that's not going to work. Yeah.
And you kind of touched on briefly, like, the effects that COVID has had on the team and your work. Like, can you expand a little bit more on how you've sort of tackled that? And I know, like, remote working is something you already you offered like a couple of days before even pandemic happened. It was a part of the team. Like, did offering that help you sort of transition into a period where everybody was working remotely a bit better?
Yeah, so for those who don't know, Hutch has always had a work from home culture. So we've always had 2 days a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, of work from home for anyone who wants to do it. So like that, on a technical level, everybody was used to it. Everybody was set up for it. Everyone has laptops. Everyone has test devices. Everyone's kind of got setups at home. So from that perspective, it was good. Where I think we had to put more effort in was more culturally, to make sure the teams were having more touch points, to make sure they had confidence in what Hutch was doing during the pandemic to keep them safe, and whether, when they were going to come back into the office, keeping those lines of communication clear. But our biggest thing has been kind of ensuring the kind of mental health of the team. I think working so long remotely is a challenge for anyone, and I think it's a challenge for family life itself. Like, I've got 2 young children myself, so coordinating that around work we tried to take as much stress away from the teams as possible. So let them know, if you've got kids, don't worry, just take care of your family life first, and let us know how much and what sort of work you can do, and we'll work around that. We brought in more mental health things, so mental health coaching, but also made counselling and therapy sessions available to the staff, to anyone who felt like they needed it, and just more touch points with the team to make sure that they're having those conversations that normally would they're quite friction free. You just see someone in the office and you go over and you say hi, but they don't happen when you're at home. You don't want to bother someone over Slack. So just try and encourage those sorts of informal communications. And there's things like, we moved our board game night to a digital board game night. We've done digital pub quizzes, that sort of stuff, just to keep the morale higher.
Cool. So yeah, we do have a few questions in the Q&A section. We'll start with this one at the top, which I will read in full because it makes me smile, because it says, "You seem to really love cars, smiley face. Is it important to keep a brand/IP connection for success?"
What for us specifically, I guess. I think there's an aspirational nature for cars, and I don't necessarily think Well, I guess I'm going to interpret that question as specifically with cars, I guess.
Sure.
But I think there's an aspirational nature to cars. I think certain games like Top Drives wouldn't function without the level of licensed cars we have. There are certain people who just want to get Bugattis and Veyrons and Zondas, and they're excited, and it's such an exciting, momentous occasion when you get it. And you kind of see that in other games as well, and like FIFA, when those sort of unwrapped videos when they open up their packs and they get Ronaldo and they're going crazy. We get similar sort of videos when people get Veyrons and Chirons and things like that. So I think it does resonate on a practical level. I think it makes working like acquisition of players a little bit easier. There's something that instantly recognized, and if those brands resonate with how your game works as well, it can make the acquisition funnel a little bit easier. But that's not to say that you have to do IP. So like F1 is obviously a licensed property, but I think some of our games that have been original IP have had huge amounts of downloads as well. MMX Racing, which is all original IP. But then Hot Wheels has had almost 100 million downloads. So it's a mixture and match. I think it definitely helps in some respects, but hinders in others.
Mm-hmm. I just lost the questions briefly. So there's a question here about how much influence the community has on your games. I know you said in your talk, like, community comes first, you've got to design for them. I guess kind of my question that I would twist on this is sort of like, how do you cut through the noise of what the community is saying? Because I've heard before that, like, obviously you've got to listen to the fans and what they're saying, but a lot of the time what they're saying is just sort of noise that you can confuse how you design the game, and you end up appealing to the wrong kind of person. Like, how do you know to focus in on the right things? It's quite a difficult question, but
it is difficult, and it's not easy, and we struggle with it a lot as well. I'm not going to say we've sussed it, but
yeah,
we try and combine what they're saying with what they're actually doing. So if you look at the qualitative data with the quantitative data, so when you're looking at your forums and your Discord servers and you're doing focus groups and stuff like that, and watching player videos of how they're actually playing, and then you combine that with the quantitative data to see what they're actually doing. Because you can get very vocal minorities who might not be representative of the larger player base. We quite often say, like, this is rubbish, this will never work. And then everybody's using it and they're loving those features.
Yeah.
So it's about combining what they're actually doing with what they're saying and trying to kind of cut through it, and using your own judgment a little bit as well. And then building that relationship with the community so they can understand why you're trying to make certain decisions. So what your challenges are. So if you're making a certain decision for a certain reason, try and help them understand that as well. So building those connections with your community as well. But I think, that's one of the things we try and get our games out incredibly early on in the development process, and just in certain markets, and just compare how they're playing compared to other ones. And you can just see so quickly whether they're engaging with that core loop. And it doesn't have to look amazing. I think great games are great games. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've got a question from Oscar Clark, which also sort of ties into another thing. So I'm going to kind of ask you two questions, but they're kind of melded together. But Oscar Clark says, Hutch are a great team, and I remember Sean maxed out several credit cards to get the company started. Do you think other studios could mirror your success today, and what lessons should they take and what should they not try to copy? And there's another question that I think feeds into that, which is, can you give us an example of what something that went wrong and that gave you the insights into creating these 5 rules?
Oscar, with your hard questions. Definitely people could mirror our success today, although don't do it in racing, that's ours. Definitely. I think there was when I joined Hutch and I interviewed with Sean, we really clicked on how we wanted to run a studio. So I joined us to kind of help build out the process, and Oscar sort of talked about how Sean would, like, when I joined, we were in the middle of getting that kind of first investment round. So Sean was really busy, and it was just about being a servant to the team and working for the team and really just trying to give them everything that they need. And I think if you try and mirror that way of working, I think there's always the potential to be successful. Mm-hmm. I think the second part of that question was, is there a specific event? And I think we've had quite a few failures, and we've had games that have been great games but haven't worked commercially. Smash Bandits is a game that comes to mind, which was one of, I think, the studio's favorite games to make. but it just didn't really work commercially. And Race Kings is another one, which is really like, it's got great ratings, and I think there's a small passionate community that really like it, but as a business it hasn't functioned, and it didn't make any it was a very expensive and painful process getting that game live. And I think going through that process where it didn't really work, I didn't feel like the team were empowered. I felt like the process wasn't working for them. I think we were misaligned on how we wanted to make it. And I think ultimately I touched on it a little bit. We innovated too much. We were coming off the back of a success. We were getting a bit overconfident. We were like, okay, we can smash it. Let's change that. Let's solve these problems. And we were trying to combine two sort of a known metagame structure with a known gameplay structure, and we just reinvented the wheel left, right, and center. So I think if you keep that in mind, in that free-to-play structures are fragile. If you look at the top games, they're all following similar kind of proven metagame mechanics. I think those are great for players because they can instantly pick it up and recognize how to play. I think there's not huge amounts of innovation going on, but I think people are innovating in their marketing, they're innovating thematically, and where they're innovating with gameplay and they're innovating with the meta systems, they're really understanding why that's an improvement over their last games or existing games, and they're really adding tangible value rather than just, let's just try something new.
Yeah. Cool. And one very quick last question. How can I reach out to you? Can you share your email? You don't have to publicly announce your email here, but what's the best way to reach out to you, I guess?
I guess if you reach out to us via Twitter or via our website, there's a contact link on our website, and that will come through to us. And we try to get back to everybody who does come through to us. Facebook pages, yeah, there's lots of ways to do it. We're still a relatively small team, so it's pretty easy to get hold of us.
Fabulous. Right. Thank you so much for your talk and for hanging around for chatting afterwards. It's really interesting, and I hope everybody learned something from it. So I'll let you go. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Rick.